Shana Tova, good Yontif, everyone. Oh, so sorry to be saying those words remotely. Hopefully next year we'll be together in person. But for now, I'm here in Aspen, helping a congregation get through an intermediary period between rabbis, and I'm very, very anxious to see you again. I miss you. And this Rosh HaShana, this year, we continue in our sequence of sermons about the Klei Kodesh, the holy objects that were on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem 3,000 years ago. We've talked about the menorah, which in Hebrew is menorah. We've talked about the ark, which is the Aron HaKodesh, that taught us about valuing the broken and the whole. The menorah taught us about Jewish unity. We've studied about the Mizbeach, the altar of burnt sacrifices, which taught us that a religion without a concept of sacrifice, a viable concept of sacrifice, is really weakened. And we talked about the kior, the wash basin, which taught us about mirrors and self-reflection, a perfect message for this season of the year. So we continue. There's a few objects left, and this one is very dramatic, even though the object is very simple. This is a sermon about bread, and it doesn't begin in a bakery. It begins on that Temple Mount. On the northern wall of the inner courtyard, there was a golden table. And on this table, there were 12 loaves of unleavened bread with frankincense sprinkled on top of them, 6 loaves of bread in one pile, 6 loaves of bread in the other pile. They were baked fresh every Shabbat, but they were left on the golden table, called the table of the showbread, lechem panim, for a week. And then the priests would take the old bread away and eat it and bring 12 new loaves. They thought it would be forever and ever. It was only for a couple hundred years. But we are going to learn about the showbread today and its symbolism for our lives. The art of baking this unique bread was so secret that the Talmud in Yoma 38a tells us that only one family knew how to bake them. It was the Garmu family. They only that family, and they never told anyone else, so the secret died with them. What was the proper shape of the bread, the showbread, the lechem panim? How to bake it? According to Rashi, the bread was shaped like an upside-down chet. Here's the shape of the chet. This is my visual aids. This is pathetic. But this is the way he thought it looked, something like that. And according to Rabbi Hanina, in Menachot 94b, the loaves were made like an open ark. So maybe they looked something like that. We don't know. According to Rabbi Yochanan, they looked like a dancing ship. That stumped me. We have a couple sailors. There are actually Jewish sailors, and a couple of them are in our congregation. So I ask you to tell me, let me know, what does a dancing ship look like? We think it might be that it had a V hull and that it danced in the waves, so maybe the bread looked like that. We don't know. Others say it was a V shape. All we know is that they didn't look like challahs, and they didn't look like matzahs. The name of the bread, the name is also a mystery. They should have been called, by all rights, something like Lechem HaKodesh, the holy bread, or perhaps Lechem HaKohanim, the bread of the priests, since they were the ones who ate it. But no, it was called Lechem Panim, which literally means face bread. Why? Even the great philosopher Maimonides was stumped. This was one of my motivations. If it stumped Maimonides, I had to have a crack at it. He said, I do not know the object of the showbread, the lechem panim. I've thought about it continually, and up to this day, I've not been able to assign any reason to this commandment. This is amazing. It's one of the only 2 times that we know of that Maimonides said he was stumped. The other was the Egel HaAdumah, the red heifer, which he couldn't, along with anyone else, figure out why that was a mitzvah, sacrificing a completely red cow. So the key to understanding God's message for us in the symbolism of the showbread is to begin our sermon with the cultural significance and spiritual significance of bread. Bread is the beginning of civilization. You can mark the beginning of human civilization with the ability of people to make bread. Because to make bread, the early humans had to settle down from being on hunter-gatherers and become farmers who grew wheat and barley, which required irrigation for their fields, which required mathematics and geometry to lay out the irrigation channels, and required raising an army to protect the fields, and that required the use of metallurgy. All this required civilization, and it all began with bread. So the first lesson of the Lechem Panim is that it's a reminder that we cannot worship God in our temples of civilization, and we cannot be proud of our culture unless we produce enough bread to feed each other. Bread is the most elemental food in our culture. Of course, it's rice in the East, but in the West, it's bread, and its distribution to the most hungry among us is the most important test of the health of a culture, and it's the foundation of all faith. The Lechem Panim is a reminder that just as God feeds us, so we must feed others. We cannot pray to God when we are starving, and if we do pray, we are praying for bread. Hunger wipes out the meaning of any other prayer. As Gandhi famously taught, to a hungry man, God is bread. I learned the truth of Gandhi's teaching one day at the Mary Brennan Inn in West Hempstead, a soup kitchen run by my teacher and friend, Gene Kelly, along with 14 other soup kitchens and centers, rescue centers that she runs on Long Island. Tommy and I were helping to serve lunch one day when a little girl named Maria arrived with her mother and her little brother. They came from their car, which was also their home. And they walked in, and they walked down the line, past the roast chicken and green beans and salad And Maria ran ahead and came to the dessert table, which had a cake. It was a birthday cake. It said happy birthday in red gel icing on top. It was a birthday cake that was donated by Emil over at the Black Forest Bakery in Lindenhurst, a great old German bakery. And Emil was a gruff, proud guy. He would never admit this, but when the Island Harvest truck came by to pick up any extra baked goods that we could take to soup kitchens, on that day he always baked a lot more than he knew he could sell, so that he would have extra to give to us. And his deal with the birthday cakes was, he would write happy birthday, and if it was your birthday, you'd buy it, and then he'd fill in your name. So Maria goes right to that cake, looks up, and says, "How did you know it was my birthday?" And we all sang happy birthday to Maria, a little girl who had never had a birthday party, never had a birthday cake. Gandhi was wrong. To a hungry man, God isn't always bread. To a hungry little girl, God can be a birthday cake. Emil and Maria are the most important test of our civilization, of our country. Can we distribute food to the hungry? Every other question of social justice pales into insignificance compared to Maria's birthday cake. For millions of children, and it is millions of children in this country, to be food deprived in a country stuffed with food is an obscenity. We need to learn how to feed each other. And it begins with bread. A story. What's the difference between heaven and hell? That's the question the student asked his teacher. And the teacher responded, "Oh, in hell, you see, in hell, all the people are sitting around a big table filled with wonderful food. And they can see the food and smell the food. They can touch the food, but they cannot bring the food to their lips because their arms are locked in an outright position." And the student said, "Yes, my teacher, that is hell. And what is heaven like?" The teacher said, well, heaven. In heaven, people are sitting around a table filled with wonderful food. They can see the food and taste they can't taste the food because their arms are also in an outright and locked position. They can smell it, but they can't bring it to their lips. And the student says to the teacher, "So what's the difference between heaven and hell, my teacher?" He responds, "Oh, you see, in heaven, the people are feeding each other. Our bread must not just feed us. Our bread must feed each other. I think that's why God required in Exodus and Leviticus that a table of bread be put in the innermost part of the Temple Mount to remind us. Lechem panim only fed the priests, but the bread of our world must feed everyone in the world. So bread is not only the world's most powerful food, it is the world's most powerful test of our compassion and our justice. Bread is also a lesson of how to give thanks for little things. Another story. Bill Paley, who was the chief executive who built the Columbia Broadcasting System from a small radio network into a major television network, and now back into a small network again because of streaming. But CBS, which was all, as I grew up back in the 50s, it was one of the 3 channels. That was it. And it enriched our culture. Yeah, Italy might have had Michelangelo, Leonardo. Germany may have had Mozart, Beethoven. But thanks to CBS, we have the Beverly Hillbillies and Dallas. I had a friend, Tom Leahy, friend of Tom's and a friend of mine, who was the senior vice president of CBS, and he's the one who told us this story about Bill Paley. Tom was invited for dinner at Bill's mansion on Searingtown Road in Manhasset. They were eating in his immense and ornate formal dining room. And at the beginning of the meal, a butler arrived with a silver plate, and on the silver plate was one roll, one dinner roll. And Bill first took up the roll, he smelled the roll, he caressed the roll, and he then gently tore it apart and ate it slowly with his eyes closed in almost meditative stance. And my friend asked him what he was doing. And Bill answered him, if I can appreciate this roll, I can appreciate everything else I have. Bread is our most elemental blessing. Bread is our simplest gift from God. If we can appreciate it, we can appreciate everything God gives us. It is halacha that one cannot recite the Birkat Hamazon, the prayer after eating, unless one has eaten at least a piece of bread. Bread is the place we begin our gratitude to God for all our blessings. Bread leads us to gratitude, and gratitude leads us to God. And God leads us to happiness. Bread represents our partnership with God. The only prayer almost every Jew knows, of course, is the motzi. And even that we get wrong. The prayer, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz, is translated as, "You're blessed, O Lord God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth." But that is not true. The blessing is not true. God does not bring forth bread from the earth. God brings forth wheat from the earth. And we then harvest it and mill it and mix it and knead it and bake it and put it in plastic. Bread is our partnership with God. When we bless bread, what we're really blessing is the way God's creation partners with our intelligence, which is also, of course, a creation of God, to combine to produce what we need to live here on planet Earth. Not only have we misunderstood the motzi, we misunderstood challah, which is the bread that the motzi is usually said over. We think that the name of the twisted egg bread for Shabbat and Yontif is challah. That also is not true. It's not challah. It's twisted egg bread. Challah is technically not the bread, but it is a little piece of dough that was taken from the dough that became the bread, and that was then pinched off and thrown into the oven to burn before the bread is baked, in memory of the meal offerings, the chalot, that were burned up on the altar in the temple. There's a bracha for taking it, and we used to say that when we went down to Streit's Matzah Factory, because they would take challah from the dough, and it ends lahafrish challah. You're blessed, O Lord our God, who commands us to take challah. If you do not take a piece of dough and you do not make the bracha, what you get from the oven is not a challah. It's a loaf of bread. Like Wonder Bread, only better. Well, Wonder Bread isn't really bread. The lechem panim is a symbol also of our partnership with God. God creates and we repurpose God's creation. That is why our craven indifference to the pollution of the world is such a sin. It is our arrogant refusal to participate with God in making this world capable of feeding us all and nurturing us all and protecting us all. Bread is the way God feeds us, and it is the way we feed God. If we understand bread, everything else in this world makes sense. If we do not understand bread, everything in this world makes no sense at all. And that is why it's called lechem panim. I think I figured it out. Face bread. Bread is the way we face each other. It's the way we see each other. And in facing each other, in seeing each other, we also see the face of God reflected in our neighbor. Bread, the lechem panim, was the symbol of our partnership to sustain the world. So try to start your spiritual journey by giving thanks for the lechem panim in your life, for the simple things. Start with bread, and two things will happen. You will reach the mountaintop, and you will have a sandwich when you get there. The most famous bread story in Jewish literature is the story of Bunshe the story of Bunshe the Silent. It's one of the greatest stories in Yiddish literature. It's an old Yiddish story, actually, rewritten by the Jewish author Isaac Leib Peretz, I.L. Peretz, born in Zamość, Poland in 1852, and he died in 1915. Peretz wrote the story of Bunshe who was a poor, unnoticed man who died after a miserable life and whose soul entered heaven, the Olam Haba. As Peretz told it, when the soul of Bunshe entered paradise, the angels were cheering him. There was a big procession, and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah, and Rachel, and Rebecca, they all came to greet him, sing praises for him, and there were angels everywhere. And they brought out a golden crown with jewels, and they put it on his head. And Bunshe was confused by the welcome he received. He was certain that it was a mistake, and that this lavish welcome was meant for someone else. God then appeared and offered Bunshe a reward beyond any human imagining. Whatever you want, Bunshe, everything is yours. That's what God declared, according to Peretz. Now you might well ask, well, how did Bunshe come to be worthy of such a reception in the Olam Haba? Peretz writes, in silence he was born. In silence he lived. In silence he died. and in an even vaster silence, he was put into the ground. He was, Peretz tells us, more tormented than Job. He was silent when his father threw him out of the house as a child. He was silent when he suffered terrible hunger. He was silent when people spat on him as he worked as a porter. He was silent when his wife ran off, leaving him with an infant. He was silent when the child grew up and ran away from him. He was always silent. Bunshe the Silent. The defending angel recounted the many horrible things that happened to Bunshe and how through it all, he never complained, not against God, not against man. His eye never grew red with hatred. Bunshe Zweig never raised a protest against heaven. Satan, the prosecuting attorney, stepped up to make the case against Bunshe. But all he could say was, "Gentlemen, he was always silent, and now I too will be silent." Then God asked Bunshe what he wanted, and Bunshe said in a low and timid voice, "What I would like, Your Excellency, is every morning that I could perhaps have a hot roll with butter." His modest request was met by silence, and the judge and the angels bent their heads in shame at this unending meekness. The story comes to an end as the silence is shattered. The prosecuting attorney, Satan, laughs aloud, a bitter laugh. Peretz and the majority of Bunshe Zweig haters in the last century, particularly Zionists for whom this was a terrible story, they saw him as a pathetic consequence of Jewish life in the diaspora. In their eyes, all ambition and world-changing hopes and dreams had been beaten out of Bunshe Zweig by his crushing poverty and by anti-Semitism. It fit their story. Perhaps they're right, but not for me. For me, Bunshe Zweig is my hero because he alone, not Rambam, not anyone, only Bunshe Zweig understood the true meaning of the Lechem Panim. He understood what Maria and Bill Paley and Gandhi and God understood. The foundation of true gratitude is the ability to appreciate the simple things in life. In Pirkei Avot, Ben Zoma asks, "Who is rich? Ezehu Ashir?" And he answers, "Sameach bechelko," one who is happy with his lot. It's interesting that at the end of the story, it is the prosecuting angel who is laughing. God is not laughing. God is crying for joy that there is finally someone worthy of eating the Lechem Panim from the golden table. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen.